I had knee surgery last week, so just getting back on my feet, moving around. I put the cane away yesterday, so we'll try this and see how well this works out. I had a presentation to put on today. I got the blue screen of death on my laptop, which is not nice since this is my week to be on call. So I guess I'm not on call tonight. We're waiting on the vice president. I think he's in traffic right now, Scott DeLecki. So we have 3 presentations. One is going to be done by Ali for Corticon. Then Progress is going to come on over the web and do a virtual presentation for us. Doug McVanick, he's out of Cleveland. He's going to present on version 11 and multi-tenancies. And then I'm going to put a presentation on replication. It used to be called Fathom replication, now it's open edge replication. We'll talk about that and the core style replication that you can do without spending $40,000 on complete replication. So we got a lot of good information coming. We have kind of a short period of time to put a lot of this information on because I wanted, the more interactive these meetings are, the better. So if you need, especially when I'm presenting, if you have questions, stop me and ask me. I know the guy from Progress, he's going to want the same thing. I don't know about Ali, but I like the presentations to be interactive. Don't sit here and walk away with a bunch of questions. Ask them now. Also, think about any other presentations that you'd like to see in the future. We're always looking for presentations. If we don't have the expertise that we can find to put the presentation on, Progress will either send somebody or do a virtual presentation for us. So this is free education for you. It costs you an afternoon and that's it. So it's best that you come and tell us what you want to hear. We will put it on for you. We just had our outing back in, we had that June, our golf outing? July. Once a year we put a golf outing on where we have presentations in the morning and 18 holes of golf in the afternoon, which is a very cheap day for members of the user group. Again, those are shorter presentations during the day, but it's a good day to get out and have fun with your people doing the same thing that you're doing in this area. Other than the golf outing, we have 3 other presentations during the year. Every quarter we put one of these on. We've been trying to move them around. We've had them at the QAD office in Novi. We've had them in Southfield. We've had them in Fraser. So we kind of move around a little bit, looking, for companies like this that were very nice to host us and put us up here. I was hoping to get a lot more people that were outside of this area to come down here. I did hear from a few people they were scared to come down here because of Woodward construction. They weren't scared of Detroit, they were scared of the construction. Oh, I'll get lost down there. Come on and get lost with the rest of us. But other than that, I mean, any place we'll go. We just don't, right now this is probably our latest presentations that we put on. We usually start around 1 o'clock, do a 1 to 5. Today we're going to do it 2 to 6, so a little bit different. Again, we're up to moving that too. We want to try to find the sweet spot to where we can get the most people. Coming to these meetings with 10 people doesn't help out a lot. It helps those 10, but I want to try to get the masses. So I'll shut up. I'll hand it over to you and put you to sleep already? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to hobble around.
Welcome all. So I'm Ali. Can everybody hear me okay? In the back too, Dennis?
Yes, sir. A little more volume.
Kind of, sort of.
Fairly
Yeah.
My fan is really loud.
Fan is really low? Yeah. The mouse works from here so on. I was asked to show you something about Corticon. Is everybody familiar with Corticon, or are people completely new to it? Do you need to get a short overview of what it is?
Short overview would be great.
Corticon is a business rules management system. That means basically, if you put it into tech terms, you take your business logic out of your source code and you put it into a somewhat visually oriented tool that helps you define your business logic and also manage it. That's in a nutshell what it does. Anything you can express in if-then statements you can put into Corticon, to put it very simple. And the showcase that I developed within an organization does just that, but not just 1 or 2 or 20, but several dozens, and it's considered a very small decision service. The decision service is a package that you deploy, which contains a bunch of cohesive business rules, if-then statements. Corticon does this in a somewhat Excel-oriented fashion. It does it in tables with columns and rows. And when you look here on the screen, the top part gives you the conditions, which are your ifs, and the bottom part here, the actions, are the thens. In a vertical direction, you would say if this and that and that and that. Every column contains all and conditions, and if all those are true, then you perform all these actions in the same column. From column to column, you would say you go or. So if 1, or 2, or 3, or 4, and the actions below that. From a management perspective, if you need to evaluate several sets of conditions, and they would all result in the same actions, you would, in theory, be repeating all those actions in every of those columns. So, in that sense, in the beginning, it looks a little daunting to start that task. But as you start to get into Corticon and configuring these business rules and these decision services, it starts to make a lot more sense, and you start to get efficient in doing so. Decision services can be split into several sheets, Excel sheets, just like you would do in Excel, where you have a workbook which has several sheets. And in order to define the flow through those sheets, you can design, if my system is fast enough, you can design a rule flow. Let me find the right one here. A rule flow looks a lot like a process model, a business process model, but one main difference is that you cannot put conditions into your flow. You cannot put the diamond shapes into your flow and say, if the outcome of a rule sheet, each of these boxes represents one of those rule sheets. If the outcome of a rule sheet is this, then do that part of the flow or do that part of the flow. It's always straightforward like this. The beauty of it is more in managing those sheets, keeping them fairly concise, and also reusing them in other rule flows. Another benefit of this is that you can deploy decision services that have various functions in them. Instead of just one single thing, you can define a number of rule flows within a decision service. Once the decision service has been created, you can deploy it onto a server and publish it basically as a service, which responds to SOAP calls. Within Progress, you also have a native method or a set of function calls that you can use, so you don't have to go through SOAP and win a little bit of performance there. Are there any questions so far?
Is this Eclipse-based?
Yes, this is running in Eclipse. When you install it straight out of the box, you can install it with Eclipse. You can also choose to deploy it into an existing Eclipse environment. But before you do that, you might want to study a manual because it's not that straightforward as just going through the setup. So you got that option of installing a second instance of Eclipse or putting it into your favorite one. And you would then, not the statements in the window. You would actually work with a perspective, an Eclipse perspective.
You issue and go to the same, install it into the same as your Progress published. So, in fact, in 11.4, it actually, if it notices that you have Developer Studio installed, it'll automatically say you want to install this into your same installation. So you don't have to flip between Developer Studio and
Very good. Any other questions so far?
Can these services call out to third-party services also? Like, say, like my thing is loans, so there might be a service for a loan, and part of it might be calling out to Homeland Security to make sure that who they say is who they are. Can the service do that? Call out to Homeland Security and then come back and do some more if statements?
Corticon itself does not do external calls yet. There's a possibility to build extensions to Corticon where you could create your own Java classes that you implement into Corticon as extensions. Once you know how that works, if you would make that, you could make that efficient. Standard out of the box, you would have to do the orchestration outside of Corticon. So you would call Homeland Security, get the service from there, handle the response, call Corticon. And that can set you back in terms of efficiency and processing your requests. Sonic would be a great tool to orchestrate that.
you have to say OpenHBPM.
Oh,
It's a
sorry.
progress monitor.
Sorry. OpenHBPM.
But the BPM product mentioned may be a good fit for that, where you would call out and then with the information you got back, make a call to not to jump in your presentation.
The school book idea behind business rules is basically that you would handle a decision within one process. So if you're modeling processes and you're modeling rules, those aren't the same thing. You don't model processes in a rule system, just like you wouldn't model rules in a process system. So if you have to go through several steps, you can't do it within one decision. You would have your process modeling tool to handle that. Any other questions?
Yeah, another one. Let's say you've got an if for between A and B, numerical integer, and then another if between C and D, but they're very disparate. They're very far apart, so there's all this space between that range. Does it have like a check or anything like that to say there's really no rule here, so just go on happy Mary, or does it say you're missing a whole set in your range?
You would probably have two rules.
I think what you're asking, there are some consistency checks that you can check to see, are you covering all conditions?
Yeah.
Check up at the top where you can say,
Is it that?
yeah, so you're not, what you're asking is, do you have all the conditions covered in your rules? If that is what you're asking, then yes, there is a check for that.
Okay.
You can also check for conflicts to say, you've got these conditions here, and there's two possible outcomes that are really the same. So you have to either give a priority to one or fix your conditions. One of the ideas behind this is to actually do exactly that, is to do consistency checks to make sure your rules make sense, where the source code is developed like that. So.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Within our healthcare organization, we have a set of measures that basically monitor the situation of our members, the health situation of our members. And an example of such a measure would be in terms of medication. We need to monitor that the member is getting the right medication in the right time, in the right quantities, and things like that. We have a lot of those measures, and in order to determine those metrics, there's a lot of data involved that we need to run through to determine whether or not medication has been dispensed in the right amounts and things like that. If all the conditions are met, in the end, the measure will give a positive result. And we call those positive results a hit. Within our organizations, it's quite difficult with just programming code to explain why a certain measure for a certain member is a hit. Result gives a positive result. And the business very often asks us questions about that, and we have to go into the database and into the logic to basically backtrack how the history of that member and their doctor visits and things like that, how those resulted in a positive hit. And that takes up a lot of resources. Corticon can actually help us to answer those questions as we are processing the data, because a very important piece, and I skipped that when I was explaining, a very important piece of Corticon is the ability, down here, is the ability to give messages about how we applied rules and what the outcome was. Those messages can, for instance, say, well, the rule is that 2 plus 2 equals 4, or variable 1 plus variable 2 equals an outcome. And my variable 1 was 2, my variable 2 was 3, add them together, the outcome is 5. Corticon can give that feedback, and we can store that feedback in the database so that when the user asks, why am I looking at a value 5, the database can actually pick up that piece of explanation, that message that Corticon generated, and say, well, here's the explanation. Variable 1 was 2, variable 2 was 3, I had to add those two together, which makes the outcome 5. And for our situation with these HEDIS measures, these health-related measures, this is a very powerful feature in Corticon. And this is the feature that I was trying to demonstrate with the little showcase that I have here, to show that we no longer have to go back into the database and go through thousands, sometimes thousands of claims to find that one that generated this positive result on that particular measure. Any questions so far?
Where are those messages stored? Where does it store those messages, that 2 plus 3?
Those messages would go into a separate table. You actually need a messages table for that. Or maybe a little more elaborate data model than just a single table.
Corticon itself does not store anything. It's not a. So we'll pull those messages back and store those into the data.
Corticon is just a logic engine, so you feed it data, it processes that, maybe it generates some more data, and gives you the whole bunch back, and then it's up to you with Progress or Java or whatever you want to use to store that data or do some more processing. So the web app that I built here, basically just what it does is it sends, once I open it, it sends a SOAP call to Corticon. Corticon applies the rules and then sends the response back. When I hit refresh, you're going to see this icon change, and it'll change back to a user icon again. And that's all the time it took to send the SOAP call to Corticon, and Corticon process the data in the SOAP call and generate the results, send it back to this web app, and the web app actually generate all the content that it needs to present to us when we start clicking the buttons. And that's on my virtual machine with just a single core, so it can be pretty quick. I can do a search, and I can look at numbers. Let's just go look for numbers. Jane Eyre, our measures are numbered. This is measure 29. I see that it is green, which means that the result on this measure for this member is positive. It's a hit. If I click on it, I'll see here some details about the member, but I'll also see the explanations. The member is not excluded based on bill type, DRG, and diagnosis code. Services and historical data didn't contain any data for 2013 that meets the criteria for exclusion. That means nothing to most of you probably if you don't know anything about heat is. To our users, it means the world, because it explains that there's just absolutely no reason to exclude this member from applying these metrics on the member. There are also no pre-existing exclusions, which means it evaluated all the data it received and it determined that there's no record from prior years that mean that it needs to be excluded in this year. Our members are divided into several populations for these measures. And for each population, there are criteria. If you meet the criteria, you are placed into a population. Up until now, basically, all we see in our system is that a member is in a population. We don't necessarily see why, and we also don't see why not. So what it's doing here is saying the member is placed in population 3 because. So it's giving exactly the criteria and how the member evaluated against the criteria. The member is 18 or over, is enrolled in a certain plan on a certain date. Anchor date means nothing to most people, but it means the world to our users again. Has the minimum days of supplies, which is around 180 if I'm correct. Is not deceased, which is a condition as well, and is also not in a medical coordination of benefits facility. So those are the conditions that need to be met to be placed in population 3. Same conditions apply to population 4, and then the third, the final message we'll see there, the member is not placed into populations 1 and 2 because the member is not currently enrolled. Apparently that condition applies to both, so I'm just summarizing that in one message here instead of repeating the same message twice in that case. That means that this member will be found in any reports relating only to populations 3, will appear for population 4, will not appear in any reports for 1 and 2. Does that make sense so far? Are there any questions?
Did you build this? Did you build this system from scratch, or did you attach to an existing progress application?
I built this from scratch.
Okay.
So the web app and the Ajax and all the JavaScript,
And
that's all just specifically for this demo. And the intention here was strictly to show how Corticon can help us answer these particular questions.
And with Corticon, you coming from the progress world as a progress developer in Corticon, is that obviously they're two separate worlds.
Yes.
So is there any crossover? If you're a progress developer, are you going? How hard is it to understand and learn Corticon technology?
I think John can answer that question better than I can, because I'm a Java guy, and for someone Java, it's much easier to understand Corticon, which was built in Java and elaborates on Java principles. John, can you answer that question?
It is a different way of thinking of it. You're not, if you're used to progress in a procedural approach and you're stepping through decisions or conditions, it is a little bit different. We did the tutorials and stuff, and we had training on site. It's not terribly difficult to work out.
I think the one main thing, and that goes for any programmer, COBOL, Progress, Java, .NET, one main difference is you don't cycle through data. You basically take all the data, put it in a sock or in a laundry bag, throw it over to Corticon, and that's how Corticon handles it. It does not go from, it does not sort the data by ID or something like that, or by date. You start with the first and then with the last. The main principle is that it looks at all the data, it looks at the conditions, and evaluates those two. And if something in the data changes, it reevaluates that part. And it continues reevaluating until nothing changes anymore. And that's how it was explained to me several times, and I'm still having a bit of difficulty grasping the concept, because in my mind that means performance issues, right? If you're thinking that way from the programmer's perspective, you're thinking, oh my God, how much performance is that going to take? How many resources is it going to take to do that? But it's with different algorithms that it does that. And in that sense, it's sometimes when you're looking at those rule sheets, and you go to the tests and you test it, and you see something change that you didn't want to change because the first time you did it, it didn't change, and the second time it did. And you're like, why is it different now than the first time? And it can be because it's not sorted in a certain way. And that's the biggest paradigm shift I think a programmer has to make, going to something that's based on RETI algorithms and things like that.
One other thing on that is, one of the things we're looking at is for some of this to be moved from the progress developer over to an analyst. Fairly technical analyst, but a set different group of people. They could sit down with the user, show them the rule sheet, and make those changes. So I think at first it will be our progress developers, but going down the road, the idea is to have an analyst sit down with this and work with it. In fact, there used to be a version of Corticon called Corticon for Analysts, although they dropped that product. It was basically what you're seeing there, but without a lot of the underlying structure.
So the developer, instead of coding all that logic and then forgetting about it 6 weeks later, that's why we can't figure out why it's why.
Yes.
He just makes a signal. He says, here's the data. Gives it to Corticon. Corticon comes back and says, here's your result. It uses it. But the business analyst is now able to go in and see what happened.
Right. And the other part of that is when we get these requests all the time, a year or two down the line, they say, how does this program work?
Yeah.
And so we,
80% of your day.
right now we have a program where pull up the code and write up an email saying, well, it's doing this, that. So the idea here is that an analyst could say, well, I'm going to pull up the rule sheet, and there's some tools in there for even simplifying that. They can pull up the rule sheet and say, this is how that program works. And if they need to, they can actually change it. Well, not in production, but they can actually change it and roll that out without having to take the default.
When it comes to understanding the decision services that were deployed, the Corticon server actually also provides documentation. So you don't have to go into the developer's environment in order to see how the rules, how the decision service is structured. You can go to the server and ask for an HTML version of the rule sheet. And when the key user on the business side and business analysts are comfortable with the structure of that, it's fairly simple to pinpoint issues that you have with it. It'll look a lot like this. I just pulled up a rule sheet here. It's a little bit simpler for reference. An analyst can learn to work with this studio and maintain rules like this. And in general, the ideal would be to have as many small rules like this as you can possibly have and not get as complicated as the previous measure I just showed. There is a big difference. These smaller pieces of logic are fairly simple to build this way. The larger pieces you could choose to make a ladder sheets. And I'm moving towards that implementation idea to have more elaborate flows. And then as you drill down into those boxes you saw in the flows, those will be a little bit more complex, but not as complex as you just saw. I have some issues with maintainability of such complex pieces of rule sheets.
Well, in code too. And I think that's the sticking point. You really want to be able to bring your business logic down the same way with
Tips.
The smaller you have, and as I explained earlier, you can create several rule flows with a set of sheets, and that way you become more flexible in directing your logic as the business changes.
Ollie, what if you pass wrong data?
If you want the outcome to be 5 and you hand over a 2 and a 2, the outcome's going to be 4. So wrong data in means wrong data out.
Does it check formatting or anything? Is it going to say
It does.
it knows this is wrong?
It does. When
Something
you're talking
wrong.
about constraints, you can build constraints in. You can both define them in your vocabulary, which is basically a data model. You can define them there. It has to be a date, and, it has to be an integer and things like that. You can also, what I like to do is have an initialization sheet that goes through certain things that you can't really do with just your simple data definitions, as in date ranges or things like that. If you have data constraints like saying, I'm looking at events that occur in the current year and the year prior, you might want to do that in a sheet and say, well, I'm going to just take the day, take the year, and then take one off and see if the dates I'm receiving fall within that range. So you can do both data definitions and you can apply specific rules to the data.
So if we send the wrong format, like for integer we send a string or something, if it is going to throw an error, the error message is going to be human readable. Like, can you make that something like another person can understand, or?
I'll show you.
John, do you see these complex decision trees in Corticon happening in under 300 milliseconds? Really? It's that relevant? Okay.
We're just implementing now, so don't hold me to that. We're hitting it.
I can't find one this quick, but I can do an evaluation of the data up here, and if the data I receive is not of the format or of the values that I'm expecting, for instance this year or last year, if I'm getting a value in 2011, I'm going to say here, the date expected needs to be in this for the prior year. It is now 2014, so anything before 2013 would not be expected. I can do that elaborate and for those. It's possible. And the length of that message is as long as is acceptable within the rules of your user interface, right? Usability rules. You don't want the message to become too long because people are just going to click it away.
Like in your web page example, if it entered one of the dates as 2041, they just invert the last two numbers, there'd be an additional message saying, this person may or may not be a hit because we have this additional record and we don't know what to do with it, or what would it do? Or would it ignore that, or?
Business rules and decision services fall within the realm of artificial intelligence. You can go that far. So if you have time on your side to make it that elaborate, you could. You could actually make it, learn from certain things and get as elaborate as you want. But your decision service is going to be quite large. You'll face the same problems you do with programming.
But can you save it in one section so then we can reuse that error checking for everything Corticon does?
You would need a decision service, I think, that you would call first.
So like in
You know,
your flowchart,
pre-validate
could there be
the
one little box of evaluate the data first to see if it's valid and just always use that box?
Is that decision services built in, or you have to build that service? Is that built in? Comes with any built-in services? So
it doesn't really come with built-in services. The only intelligence that is built in is what John just mentioned. You can check for consistencies and completeness. And those are quite powerful.
So
that's where Corticon differs from a lot of other rules engines. Corticon can actually check for consistency and completeness. Which you have to be careful with, though, because if you have 15 conditions, you can have up to 25,000 variations. If you check for completeness, you're going to get a lot of them. You don't want to go through all of them and check them for relevance. That's where it's a little bit. That's a caveat with the completeness check.
I just want to say, we'll be calling directly from OpenEdge, which eliminates a lot of the possibilities of, it's expecting an integer. You mentioned expecting an integer, you passed in a letter or a name or something like that. So the way we'll be calling it is, we'll define a pro data set, we'll export that pro data set, and load that in as the vocabulary in Corticon, and you'll get no choice as far as doing a SOAP call run or anything like that. We're going to call that directly. So some of the validation we'll handle because you just can't call it
One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the vocabulary. I did mention it and say it's the data model. Rules engines work with data and they structure it in a hierarchical fashion and call it a vocabulary. When you're used to working with relational databases, you're going to have to make a little bit of the translation when you're making the calls, but then again it's XML based. If you're used to translating your progress data into XML files, it shouldn't be too hard of a transition to understand the vocabularies that Corticon works with. What you're seeing here are input, output, expected. I could actually copy the output to the expected so that it can evaluate as I'm continuing to develop my rule set. I can constantly check for, okay, what's changing between my test now and previous tests. This is a part that I can define myself, take the elements that I need in my test and populate them here, put values in, just dummy values. When I run a test, it will actually run through the Corticon rules, come up with the outcomes, and it will present it here. What you're seeing now is some bold. That's actually data that has changed because Corticon applied the rules to the data that I put in. What I have here is member data with some history records and some actual services that took place for that member. When I hit this button, it might take a while because it might have to compile. When I take that button, it's going to apply the rules of all my rule sheets, go through the entire flow, calculate the outcomes, and show the outcome in the output. This is a test tool of Corticon. It's pretty powerful because you can actually take real data out of the database and enter it into that hierarchy on the left in the input and perform tests and make fairly good predictions on what's going to happen with this rule set and support this decision support. We see now that there are no errors here. Nothing is incorrect. Down here I see all the messages that are generated, and every message fits within a domain, an entity. For instance, services number 6 is what this message applies to, and it automatically selects that one so that I see what this message relates to. That one also goes for service 6, service 7. Those IDs here are Corticon specific. They're not your tuple-based IDs or primary keys in your database. Those are usually inside the data set.
Ali,
Yes.
which server it runs on?
Server, Linux.
It's running on its own server.
It's built in, right? Which server it runs on?
Which server?
Yeah,
This particular one here.
yeah.
Well, this is just Studio, but my showcase runs on a Tomcat server that's on my own virtual client. So performance of my machine is about this much. And I think we have dedicated servers with 4 cores, which would have about that much performance in comparison. So it'll be a lot faster once it's deployed. If you're asking for an IP address, you're going to have to go to John. He knows
I'm
that.
expecting to see an email asking for access.
Are there any questions?
Ali,
Yes.
how do you manage test versus QA versus production and history of rules so you can tell what the changes in the rule base was?
Development first to production, so your development stream is of course the same as with any production environment. You would need separate Tomcat instances, probably on separate machines. Versioning you would do with your, first of all, with your version control system. but there's also versioning inside the server. You can actually up and down versions of your decision services on the server.
So it
What I haven't figured out yet is how you work with concurrent versions on one server in production. That if you would want to do HEDIS measures for the prior year with the decision service you deployed then, and you want to do HEDIS measures for this year with the decision service you deployed now, I haven't figured that one out.
We're just working on how the deployments are going to work and how we're going to promote things through the environments. Work in process.
So can we use it to just dump a file in and then get a pro data set out saying do this?
That's pretty much how that works.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So
Progress is John. That's the part that
basically what we would do is we would populate a pro data set, which looks just like the vocabulary he just showed you. You do a call to Corticon and you get a pro data set back.
So how about where we have dual enrollment, so I want to throw a file for Medicare and then a file for Medicaid? What do I have to do for that?
I don't know. It depends on the tool that you're trying to do. I'm not sure.
Well, would I basically have to pass both at once to say evaluate both these files at once, or is there something where I could set one, it could save the data for later, and then when the second part comes, it can finish evaluating?
I guess you might have to write a custom Java service or something to check which file is coming in. Can you do that though?
No.
No, Medicare and Medicaid I could simply do within a Corticon within a sheet. So
Oh,
you
rule sheet,
hand
you
over the member with their data, and somewhere it will give you the LB, the line of business, and I'll go like, okay, if it's Medicaid, do this, if it's Medicare, do that.
I'll check the
Another option would be to say, well, I'm going to ask Corticon which service to call. We can architect it that way. I'm going to give you my line of business. You tell me what do I need to do. You can write a rule set like that too. For instance, if you'd be talking about the welcome procedure for new members, you want to know what letters to send, what phone calls to make, and things like that. If the processes between two lines of business are completely different, you would basically give your new members' data set to Corticon. Corticon evaluates that and gives you back, well, these are the steps you go through, these are the steps to skip. You can do that. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much. The thing is, right now, the federal file will say, you need this information from the state. And the state will say, you need this information from the feds. But we get the files at different times.
That's a whole other issue. That's an issue with the feds.
So is there a way I can throw in one file, it can say, I'm going to append and wait for this, then no, I should use this data set with the next file to throw it back in again and finish up?
No, I think that's a whole. You're not going to throw anything in there that's not going to be away from you. You have to have everything you're going to use.
All at once. So I need both files.
You would need both files.
If I could resolve the issues between Fed and state, I would probably retire very soon.
That's a business issue.
Well, that's what this is for. It's for business to make the rules, right?
That's actually, in all seriousness, that would actually be more of a workflow issue, and not something that you can work on. In other words, I've got the one file. Well, now I need to wait or have.
Well, some things can run from that file. I just can't do all of them.
Right.
BPM
more of a workflow.
The BPM helps you with that design flow, and then you can lay the Corticon rule sets inside of that. It's integrated. So that's what John is saying. There's a different application that can help you work through some of the issues that you're having with the receipt of the files, because the timing is off, it's different. So that you can stage the data and then make a decision on how to process that information once you receive it. That's a different tool.
Does it make sense to everybody so far?
Yep.
Good?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Couple things. I didn't get information that I should have gotten, the critical information. Restrooms are where? Straight back where we started coming in at?
Just before you go out the doors to where the elevators are at, the bathrooms will be to your
Also, if
left.
you go out the door,
You've been too far.
okay. Back of the room, Scott. Restroom straight back where you came before you go out the door, to your right. To your left. Why right, your left? Is that how it goes? We're going to take a little break here. We have progress set up to go at 3:30. I can get it. I have to dial it for them. One other question: do we have any vendors here other than Mr. Main? I wanted to recognize Mike Main from Cyber Science. He has been a great member for us. He comes to all our meetings and things like that. Great product, great tool.
They know us by the name CyberCore, and they have it here. They have 15 developer license.
Wonderful. The folks that use it know it. But he's been a great support for us. So I recognize our vendors and things that support us at all of our meetings. Let's take a quick break. Be back here 3:30. It's 3:18 I have right now. So.